webinar. And we would love for you to just type into the chat bar where you are joining us from. We often have people from all over the world, which is great. And we're excited to talk today with David. So just chat where you're joining from. Palestine, welcome, welcome. And so glad you can join us with all that's happening there. Welcome. We're thinking of you. Florida, Charlotte, North Carolina, Montana, Washington, D.C. Wonderful. And if you're just joining us, if you could let us know where you're joining us from. We have people usually from all over the world, and we're going to begin in just a few seconds here. Again, this is the Leading Through Change, the Essential Role of Emotional Intelligence webinar with our special guest, David Edgerton, SVP, Senior Vice President at Erie Insurance for Information Technology. Just type into the chat if you could where you're joining us from. It's wonderful to see people from all over the world, from Palestine to Italy to the UK to Mexico City to here in the US. Welcome, everyone. So I'm excited for our conversation today. My name is Rich Fernandez. I'm the CEO of SIY Global. We focus on emotional intelligence skills in organizations, and particularly in the ways that those skill sets can enable and accelerate growth and transformation and change in organizations of all sizes. Today, my special guest is David Edgerton, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the past year. At Erie Insurance, which is, in full disclosure, one of the clients here at SIY Global. But David and team have been harnessing the tools of emotional intelligence, working those into their leadership at a time of significant change and transformation in your business, David, Erie Insurance, the organization in which you work, which, if you're not familiar, is a Fortune 500 company based here in the United States. I think it's number 347 out of Fortune 500, something of this. A+ rated insurance company focusing on auto, business, life, home insurance, the full suite. Wonderful organization that I've had the pleasure of interacting with. And David in particular is the Senior Vice President for Information Technology. And has a background. I'll ask David to introduce, maybe I'll ask you to introduce yourself in a second, a background in nuclear engineering, and just a wonderful champion and advocate for what I would call these human-centric skills and the role they play in leading organizations through change. So David, and to all the participants, welcome. David, maybe if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little sense of your background, first of all, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Rich. Very happy to be here, even if here is in Erie, Pennsylvania, my office, but here with you virtually with everyone joining. I'm humbled by all the folks that have chosen to join us and really looking forward to the conversation. Hopefully, we'll be able to share some of my experiences and insights, and I really do hope to hear from you in the questions and answers so that we can have this dialogue. But I'm going to be leaning on Rich quite a bit throughout the conversation because he's the expert, and I've really enjoyed our conversations. So who am I? David Edgerton, as Rich has said. I have been with Erie for over 9 years. I'll hit 10 years this fall. And prior to Erie Insurance, as Rich said, which is a regional carrier, we actually have 13 states in the District of Columbia, but we really compete with some of the more well-known nationwide insurers. And so how has Erie been successful? Well, it's this relationship-focused company. We're celebrating our 99th year this year, our 100th anniversary next year. And it's a very inclusive, very familial, very rich culture. And we'll touch on that as we go through and why emotional intelligence is so important in change management. But I've held a couple different roles in my time here at Erie. All of them have been within information technology and some of the application teams that are providing benefits and solutions for our agents to sell and service our policies, as well as more recently being responsible for our data modernization program. And then even more recently than that, I've been asked to take responsibility for our enterprise business agility transformation. So as an enterprise, we've decided to become agile, and not just in the immediate technical execution, but really in all the enabling process. So working on that. And then there's a couple other emerging areas that I've been asked to help with. So there's some additional responsibility there. But as Rich said, prior to Erie, which I joined in 2014, I was part of the United States military. I entered the United States Navy out of high school, and I joined their Navy nuclear propulsion program. And I was able to be picked up for an officer program. And then I served on 4 ships for a total of 20 years. And that included a lot of high stress situations, a lot of changing cultures too. At one point, I counted that I'd been part of 19 different, teams, because when a commanding officer leaves or joins, it absolutely has an impact, and it starts to transition that culture. And so when I tallied up how many different combinations of that, I realized that it was diverse. And so how I got connected with emotional intelligence, it was almost like finding something you didn't know you were looking for. When you lose your keys, you realize you're happy, you get back on your way, and you go forward. But every once in a while you find something and you say, that's exactly what I was looking for. And so when I reflected on my experience, it really was persevering through high stress situations and organically leaning on some reflective practices. So in the really high stress environments, low sleep, high tension, a lot at stake, I would find myself journaling just to get out some of my thoughts, just to get out some of those frustrations. And through that, I would start to see a path forward, and I would start to work through that. So once I joined Erie, within the first year of joining, I was asked to participate in a leadership program. And in that, I was introduced to broad forms of mindfulness, but more importantly, emotional intelligence and what we can use it for. And all of a sudden, everything just started making sense. And, of course, to say I'm passionate about it would be an understatement. I think it's essential in understanding these skills so that when we interact with one another, we have that respect for each other, and we really take a moment to be compassionate and think about where the other person is. And so I'll wrap this up, but really the most important takeaway in the early stages of my exploration was being more present with people. And I was falling into the trap of having a busy day. And so my mind was thinking about the next activity and the next activity. And I was not doing justice, and I was not paying respect to those individuals I was with. And so just finally acknowledging that where I should be is right here with you, Rich, and with everybody that's called in, accepting that this is where I am and this is where I should be, really put me more at peace, even in more hectic environments.
I love that. Thank you for highlighting an actual real-time example of what it means to sort of be present, as they say. So I have a few other follow-up questions. Also, I want the listeners to know, if you're listening to this, our plan is to stop about halfway through this time together and open it up to questions. And so if you have questions for David, if you have questions about this body of work, please go ahead and type them either directly into the chat bar, or if you prefer, into the Q&A tab. You see a little icon for Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So go ahead and type those in. And you can type those in throughout the webinar, by the way. You don't have to wait for the Q&A section, especially if something we're talking about spurs a thought for you or a question. Please just go ahead and talk about being present. If you have the question in that moment, go ahead and type it in, and we'll do our best to either address it there or during the time we have reserved for Q&A. So if you wouldn't mind, David, let's pick up from there. So it's funny because when I was sharing about this webinar on LinkedIn, I wrote, every once in a not often enough time do you meet a leader who gets it. And I was referring to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Exactly what I was referring to was what you mentioned, which is the essential nature of emotional intelligence skills for leadership and for enabling positive results in very demanding, high performance, potentially high stress environments. And so you get it. I appreciate that. And you've been a huge champion for the work that we do here and in conjunction with you, because that's what we do. We do train these skills for leaders and organizations. Here's my question, though. What about the leaders that don't get it, right? Because how does that go? How does it play out when you have to talk to peers who, not through any ill intent, but simply maybe have never been exposed to this body of work. Like you said, Erie is a wonderful culture. I can vouch for that, having experienced it. It's very relational, but maybe nobody has really. Maybe there's some peers that have never really experienced this skill set. Emotional
Mhm.
mindfulness, honing empathy as a skill. So what happens when you come across those peers and need to kind of collaborate across? What's
Yeah. Probably 1,000 various thoughts go through my mind. So I'll touch on a few and then let's explore this because this is a great one. Number one is appreciating that there is a multitude of different personality and leadership types. And along my journey, I realized that I will not lead like everyone else, and everyone else will not lead like me. And there's no expectation that we do. I think we're better for having that mix. And so I am not on a mission to change or manipulate how everybody views this, because I think we are better for having more clear-cut objective and operational viewpoints, and then some that are appreciating and acknowledging some of the emotional side as well. So, but that said, we are all people and we're all on a complex mission and there's high stress. So serving one another in a way in which we can get the best out of a team has business results. And you've touched on that. The entire premise of Search Inside Yourself is helping organizations get to successful outcomes in a faster pace. So I've got a couple different things I'll touch on, and it will correspond to the levels of my engagement at the enterprise. And so first is grassroots. And so I'll work up to answering your specific question, but I enjoy the exploration and I enjoy the interactions and helping people become more mindful and more aware, because that to me is the biggest first step for self-improvement. If someone is directed to improve, the motivation to improve is attached to some external entity. And as soon as that changes or goes away, that motivation goes away as well. And so at my grassroots level, I'll work with leaders, I'll work with individual contributors, and I'll have some level of coaching going on that helps me connect with people and ask the questions to get them interested in becoming more aware and more mindful. And in that kind of exploring and then connecting into, if it's helped you as an individual, how might it help you to connect in with how other people are thinking and what they're mindful of. And then at the team level, I see a lot of the interactions that, again, a lot of agenda to accomplish, a lot of stress. So I look for some of those problem statements, like, is a team failing to deliver? Is a team failing to connect with one another? Are there common themes or challenges? So most recently, I pulled upon Search Inside Yourself to deliver adaptive resilience training when we were in the pandemic, because I recognized one of my teams was very much distracted with what was going on in the world and what was going on in their life. So pull in a training, and it really allowed some great discussions and some practices for people to use and then go hopefully solve some of those problems and get their life in balance. And then lastly, so that's individual, that's team level, and now at the enterprise level, and this is where it's peer level. I do it with kindness, meaning one, I look for advocates. I look for some of my peers that are interested in emotional intelligence and some of these awareness practices, and we talk about how might we be able to leverage this to our benefit. And we look at some of those major change initiatives. So enterprise business agility is a fundamental change in potentially roles that our enterprise has, how we work with one another, expectations of those roles, supporting process, all of those things will change. And so if people are entering into that and don't have certainty up front, which we won't have, what would help them? And one is, if the answer isn't we're going to have everything scripted in advance, then it starts to open up an opportunity to say, well, gosh, the people need something. They need reassurance. They need clarity. I don't want to give too many taglines, but this concept of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, you have to earn that right. You can't just say that to a team. You have to have some feedback loops or mechanisms or ways for people to feel connected and served, even when they don't have all of that available. So the bottom line up front, which is now at the bottom, would be helping someone become more aware is the most difficult challenge, because it is by definition the blind spot if it's not there. So the approach I take is I start asking questions that can help to point some of that focus, some of that consciousness internally. And once I do that and start to connect more into how people are experiencing these challenges and these changes, and then I kind of shift the questions to then focus on their team or their leaders. And then we start to work into that. Um, I'll pause there, but we probably should spend a little time talking about that leader retreat, because I think that was a really good, tangible way in which we try to get some more people aligned.
Great. Yeah. So let me give the context for that. So David, myself, and some of his colleagues, leaders at the organization, peers who are driving some of these business transformations, particularly around agile, all were able to convene for a day-long trust opportunity retreat. It's one of the offerings we have here at SLY Global. It's called the Trust Opportunity Leadership Retreat. And really, it has to do with building trust and connectivity across leadership and then with stakeholders in the organization. And then we accomplish that by really doing deeper dives into emotional intelligence skills like empathy, like in-group, out-group, compassion, and what does that mean when you're undergoing massive change. And also simple awareness and attention training so that you are able to be present with those stakeholders as you seek to, I love what you said, earn the right
Mhm.
to ask them to sit in uncertainty with all of the change that you're trying to drive. So everything I just said was applicable and as an invitation to this group of senior leaders like David. It was his peer set, and many of these folks, some of these folks running billion-dollar P&Ls, more multi-billion-dollar P&Ls, and at the same time trying to transform the business so that there's new business practices that will enable the future of the organization. Again, agile in particular, we're talking about.
Mhm.
The topic was trust, that human-centric quality that underlies the business transformation, and how might we cultivate that as a skill set. That's what we spent the retreat doing.
Mhm. Yeah.
In a very structured way with like very clear, concrete outcomes, stakeholder mapping exercises. I think that was crucial. And so maybe we can follow up there, David, and ask, in the spirit of this idea that building the skills of empathy and trust and psychological safety um, allows you to earn the trust of others in
Mhm.
the organization, other leaders, other team members. That is the theory of the case. What is
Mhm.
the reality of the case, right? So in doing that type of skill cultivation, did it translate over? I'm actually curious to know, because it's been a couple of months since we had
Yeah.
that. So how's it going? What does it actually look like? Do these things actually, beyond theory, have an impact in the organization?
Yeah. One tremendously valuable opportunity for us to get away and spend time together. And while we created a group or named a group S7, and it's really senior leaders, and there's 7 of them, so not very creative. And I've learned to shy away from the group names that have a number, because the participants can ebb and flow, and so you're kind of dating yourself on what you name yourself. But the 7 of us had a shared bond. We were part of a larger senior leadership team, 17 or so senior vice presidents in the organization. The 7 of us had the specific accountability and charge to help drive the change leadership of enterprise business agility. And so we looked at this leader retreat to help us unlock ways that we can work better together and involve some practices. And then, of course, with the end goal of accelerating change across the organization. Rich, as you said in the beginning, we're a pretty good group. Like one of the things I am eternally grateful for since my time at Erie is each year that goes on, we have stronger commitment and ties at senior leadership level. And when you are approaching something as significant as an enterprise business agility transformation, if it's not coming from the top, then our chances of success aren't very great. So we've got the CEO buy-in, we've got the executive buy-in, and then this group of senior leaders are very connected. I'll touch a little bit on some of the activities. Again, just because we like working together and we've got some humor as that goes through, we do not think the same and we do not always agree. And so when I was politely offering this as an option for the team, I got mixed results as I went around. And by the second or third time, I think the common benefit was we're going to spend time together, and we need that. And if we've got some additional practices that we can involve, then we're better for it. So most people were just counting on a little bit of focus time together. What we were able to do is really provide science, provide some practice, and then we had real business challenges come up during our time away that we were able to use these practices for. And so the empathy exercise really resonated with all of us. And we have yet to do one, but what we did do upon leaving the leader retreat, we have an every other week cadence as a group. And so we meet just us to be able to talk through some of the challenges and what's holding us back, as well as allow other groups to come in and share some of the, enterprise business agility related topics. But the empathy exercise is when an individual shares some of the challenges they have. And it could be stakeholders, it could be skill sets, it could be process, whatever the challenges are that you're experiencing. And two other individuals or whoever else is, in attendance, they're listening. And then they actually converse and talk about, wow, they empathize with those challenges. If these are my challenges, here's what I would be thinking. Hey, maybe they should consider this. So they have a discussion about your problems with you present, like you're not there. And it's fabulous because that's a very tangible and real way for people to take on those challenges, because that's the assignment. Like, these are my challenges now. How am I going to solve that? So it's both idea generation, it's building the trust to be able to share those types of things. It's by definition vulnerability, because these are challenges. I don't know what to do. I'm open to ideas. So that practice was really fantastic. We've done it in isolated events, but not as a group activity, and the intention is still there. So then one level past that is we have reformed our approach to agility this year in a good way. So we had 3 specific tracks that we're moving forward. Now what we have is, we call it a hub and spoke model. So the hub is the S7 group plus additional leadership members. So we're expanding our inclusivity on who's really tightly coupled with the accountability of this transformation. And then we've got 6 focus areas, and each one of those is led by one of us, one of those, S7 individuals. Actually, there's co-leaders. So again, we've included more leaders there. And we're making progress on 6 fronts simultaneously while being very connected and orchestrating that across. That's not possible if we didn't have that ability to share challenges, to be accountable to one another, and actually debate on some of the things that we don't always agree with.
Yeah, and the empathy piece is key because, I think that is a skill that you can build. We know that
Yes.
we know that in practice. And just for everyone's reference, what we did was essentially a peer coaching model where we had small pods of this S7 group work with each other, present each other business challenges, and then take feedback from each other, and really use the lens of in-group, out-group, right? Also, like, who's in the out-group? Who needs to know? What do they need to know? Concerns. So it's a model we utilize for peer coaching. So super helpful. What do you think are remaining challenges, David? As again, if I frame this as the topic is leading through change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Continuing to lead through change. You're continuing to adopt agile as a way to operationalize business transformation. What remains to be done? And how might you draw on these skills to help with that?
We have a lot more to do for sure. We kicked off in earnest, top down, at the end of 22, and last year for our transformation was focused on 8 of our strategic initiatives, or 8 of our larger efforts. And our partner in agility transformation said, it's your choice on how far you jump into the pool and how deep the pool is that you're jumping into. And we really chose to jump in quite far and quite deep. We made a lot of progress last year, but now today, in 24 and 25, today is the habit loop phase. So we need to continue to expand this out to all teams that are going to be transitioned into agility. That includes tool adoption, process change, role change. So we've got a long agenda of things that will continue to change. And so where does this tie in? How is it that wherever we fall in the chain, can feel confident that we're providing the needed resources and communication and change management if we don't have all the answers ourselves? And so that question, that eternal paradox, we will never have all the answers, and we want to be able to figure it out along the way, but that's not always going to resonate with everyone. So the immediate challenge for us is, how do we prepare leaders to operate in that ambiguous space? And is there a technique that can help someone live in that ambiguity And that's where this comes in. Like there's such a strong need for a practice at a team level, at an individual level, to say, you know what, my leader doesn't have the information today. That affects how I might be viewed at the end of the year. How am I going to be okay with that? What is my recourse, and not just in a process sense, but do I talk to peers? And when I talk to peers, am I complaining about what's not working? Or am I able to talk through, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we had this? And together we were able to think through, how do we think about the external partner? How do we think about our business constituent? How do we think about all those people that we're here to serve? And that immediately makes it a little bit less about us. So those types of challenges, I think we need help in.
Yeah, I love that you frame this as a habit loop. The way I hear that is, how do you, transition and change, classic change management from sort
Right.
of these systems, processes, mindsets to the transformational one that you're trying to put
Yes.
in. And what I'm hearing is to be able to navigate that together in a very human-centric way. If
Yes.
what we're referring to is habit loops and old patterns of behavior that have us utilizing legacy systems and processes, what we're talking about is mindsets that will help us resolve that habit loop. And without awareness and emotional intelligence, and those other centric skills like empathy and compassion, it's impossible. So I
Right.
really, like I said, everybody, David gets it. And now it's also about helping invite the S7 and others, the other leaders in the organization, to harness those skills for that transformation as well. But maybe we could, we're about halfway through our time together. And as I promised, we should also think about
Yeah.
questions from the audience. So again, I'm going to encourage everyone listening, please write in any questions. We got a couple already in chat, but
Mhm.
please continue if you have other questions for David or myself, really around leading through change, harnessing emotional intelligence skills as leaders, as teams in organizations. Please put them into the chat. So I think one first question is the practice that you mentioned all the way into
Mhm.
at a difficult time, in your early career, you went to journaling. So how do you use that in terms of, I think the question is specific to then leadership as well. How does
Yeah.
that leadership?
So again, I always like to give a couple caveats. So what I'm most an advocate for is reflective practice in general. And so I think for each person, it's up to them to define what that is. It could be running, where you process your thoughts. It could be cross-country skiing. It could be yoga. It could be, swimming. It could be any activity. Typically, it's those that put us in that state of flow, where we stop to think about, I must do this task, and I just get into that comfortable sense. Journaling seems to resonate with me, and so I've developed a daily practice to journal, and I do a couple of things. So how does it help me in my leadership of people? I look, the outcome is I shorten my feedback loop. So if it takes me a week or two or three to realize that something went wrong and I could have approached it differently, then I could be doing other harms as I go along. And so each day, at the end of the day, I journal how the day went. I look for those opportunities of what I'm thankful for. I look for those opportunities of what, emotional peaks and valleys, where was I really successful and what was going on there, or what really stayed with me in a negative way. And by doing that, I'm bringing those experiences front of mind. I'm connecting with the feeling and the emotion, and then I'm putting in a logical action that I can do in the future. It also is a consistent trigger for me to think about what the other person has on their plate, what the other person's outcomes are and needs. So journaling as a practice for me greatly accelerates my ability to re-engage with an individual. And I will say it's gotten over time that I can do this, mentally as I'm in a meeting or in between meetings, so it doesn't always have to wait a day. But for those more significant challenges, I'm able to make progress in a meaningful way. So I do encourage others to find that reflective practice and do that. How it comes up in my advocacy of it for others, certainly in coaching engagements, I will ask them, how do they work through challenging times? And then I try to cultivate an opportunity for them to develop a practice in something that it comes more naturally for them, because I want it to be able to, stick and actually help them serve themselves. There's been occasions where, not in a group setting, but if I'm working with one of my leaders, we'll actually, I'll give homework and it won't be, here's this assignment for work. It's because of the struggles or challenges that we're talking about. And if it's people related, or if I see, um, that stress building up to a certain level, I try to ask them to go ask themselves some questions and put some thoughts on paper, and then we follow up. And I find the progress of journaling, it's not an advertisement for journaling, but it slows your mind down because you can't think as fast as you write. And so you have to consciously agree with your body what you're putting down. And there's some sort of logical progression to it. No matter how long you can spin or dive on something, there's always going to be an end to it. So I think it's a fantastic practice, but it's just not the only practice.
I love it. You keep dropping some real nuggets. Like you have to consciously agree with your body what you're
Yeah.
going to put when you write it out long form. And
Yes.
it and because we can think almost as we can type almost as fast as we think, but that doesn't leave time for reflection. But doing it long form, research actually shows college students take notes long form by
Yes. Retain.
information much better because
Mhm.
they can't write as quickly as they type, and then when they type, they don't retain it as much. So fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, so we have some questions coming in. Thank you all for offering these questions. One is the questions, you've mentioned some of them already, but the questions Leo asks, what kind of questions do you use to surface self-awareness?
Mhm. I'll share the way I start most all coaching engagements. So aside from kind of helping define what coaching is and what the partnership is going to look like and making sure I understand their background and what they want to get out of it, the first practice or exercise I lead people with is a North Star exercise. And there's nothing magical about it, but there is a lot of science behind it. And it falls under the intentional change therapy, which says that if we can picture ourselves in a better state, in a better way, in a better approach, like if we can, really connect in with ourselves improved, it's an internal opening of our ability to accept feedback. And it is that internal motivation for us to seek out change. Very different than when you're on the soccer field as a kid and the coach is directing you to do something. Often when you leave that soccer field, it's only a matter of time before those practices go away because that was that external direction. And so my goal is to find that internal opening, that internal motivation. And again, it's proven, there's justification that if we picture someone that we hold in high regard, if I picture Abraham Lincoln before this interaction, I will naturally open myself up. I might stand a little taller. I might grow a beard really quick, but I'll have a little bit more stoicism. So when you think about yourself improved, that opens up the door to say, are all those things true for you today? And so what I skipped is the ideal state is so North Star exercise. It is 3 to 5 sentences phrased in the present tense. So you're kind of writing out like I am this, and it's picturing yourself as fully actualized, like your journey as a person, as a leader, you pick it. But where do you want to get to in 10, 20 years? Write those out. And then it allows me to answer, like ask the questions like, which one of these is most true for you today? Let's start somewhere and really understand what is it that makes it most true for you today? Which one of these do you think you have the furthest way to go? And we just ask question after question and we start to pull apart. And it tells me so much. It tells me, what they hold important. What are those values? What are the morals? What are the ethics that they live by? Who are the people that they can associate with to really help them in this journey of this practice? So there is no one single question, but I find when you ask them about things that are true for them, and then you push them into the future and that area of improvement, it opens up the door wide open for awareness.
I'm smiling because that is one of the core practices we teach, as you're familiar, which is an envisioning exercise.
Yes.
I think our time horizon is in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think the prompt is if everything meets or exceeds your greatest aspirations,
Mhm.
what would your life or work look like? And then you do have to write it in the present tense. I am doing this. I am
Yes.
this. I am in conversation with these people. Yeah. So there is something really powerful about concretizing. And like you said, giving yourself conscious permission to write it down and to really kind of take it in, be present with it.
Yeah.
Good questions and such great, again, thank you, David. Like I said,
Thank you.
all our leaders could have the kind of wisdom you're sharing. Let me come to some of the other questions. Specifically, there's one on agile. There's a few on psychological. There's one on psychological safety. There's one on time. So let's first go. Honey, thank you for this one on agile, which, as you point out, optimizes efficiency. There's software and other process components, but also very much relational components such as Scrum and sprint planning and retrospectives alike. So considering that Agile's outcome is speed and efficiency, are you thinking about how mindfulness can be practiced in that environment? And then following up with that, Andrea, what kind of practices would you recommend? Oh, sorry, that's a different one. Sorry. Let's just stick with the Agile one for now from Honey.
Okay.
Mindfulness
Yeah.
practice.
So I'll talk a little bit about reality and then but I'll start with dream state, which is really agility is about empowering. We've got clear objectives for the enterprise, and those are aligned all the way down to the different levels of our enterprise. And then at the team level, you've got a group of people that are working consistently together. So an actual delivery Scrum team that has 7 plus or minus 2 people. Why not create strong psychological safety? Why not value diversity? Why not open up the opportunity for challenge and debate, knowing that everybody has a voice and everybody has value to be added? So I think mindfulness is in every step along the way in that value chain. I think if our executive team is mindful of what our enterprise is about, they're going to make better decisions for the vision and the strategy. We're not going to pivot and go counterculture. We're not, because they're being mindful of who we are and what's important to us and what our independent agents value, what our customers value. So mindfulness shows up at every step along the way. If I think about what Agile does, Agile is intentionally putting more of the decisions on the how to the teams. And if they're mindful in how they come up with a design and actually try to accomplish those outcomes, it means they're going to have the voice of the customer in mind. And that's an Agile principle. It means that they're going to challenge. It means that they're going to have peer accountability. So if I'm waiting for something, I'm not going to sit and just wait and wait and wait. I'm going to stand up in a stand up and I'm going to say something and we're going to get to the outcome sooner. So we have some of these things in practice. We do stand-ups. We have more and more participation. We have one of our events is called Big Room Planning, and it's in the process where we take these large epics and we have broken them into features. So epics are 6 to 9 months, and of course features would be a couple months, and then down to the story, which is a sprint level work. The Big Room Planning is pulling together the leaders and all of the team members, and there's transparency in what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then the teams are actively engaged with the business partners saying, if you need that, it's going to take longer, and actually breaking down some of those design criteria and actually breaking down some of the silos. So that type of engagement is highly valuable for speed, but if we do it without mindfulness, we would do it without compassion and empathy, then people are going to leave there and we'll have accomplished an outcome, but they won't want to come back. And I really would love if things were sustainable. We're picking up the pace, but we're not losing that humanizing element of the work.
I think, and they're not binary, they can go together. And I think the intentionality to bring them in as a skill set is what's the differentiator.
Yes.
So for example, when you're talking about stand-ups or retrospectives, mindful listening, very simply defined as listening with full attention for the sake of understanding.
Yes.
To understand what the other has to offer. Refute, argue, negate, but be present, pay attention, understand what is being shared. And it's an automatic, not only mindfulness and attentional skill, but I think also a core empathy skill. Yeah. In training that it's not that difficult, but it just requires intentionality to say, let's develop this skill set of listening.
It does. Yes.
Which makes me laugh because it's such a fundamental human thing and it's so simple. Like when we teach it, it's like, listen for the sake of understanding. And that's it. That's the whole thing. So super valuable, I think, in Agile. And those are great illustrations, David. Thank you. We have a related question around psychological safety. So Cindy, thank you for this question. Could you speak to the level of psychological safety that may already be present in the S7? So you've got a very cohesive group. And by the
Mhm.
way, so as a visitor to that group, I can say it was extraordinary, those who are listening. Like, I have rarely met a set of leaders that have that level of quality relationships. This is a group, if I might share, that like we all had dinner together. It was a super engaging, dynamic dinner. And then after a day of meeting, and then everyone wanted to go back and play code names, which is a kind of a strategy game, board game together because they just wanted to hang out.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about. So it's a group that seems inherently to have really strong relationships. So, okay, so that may be already present, as Cindy points out. But the question is where it may be lacking psychological safety, the ability to take risks and speak
Mhm.
transparently and directly, where it may be lacking either within that group or with other individuals involved in the change efforts. How do you understand that psychological safety, and what do you do to strengthen the levels if they need to be strengthened?
Yeah. It really the approach needs to be tailored to the individual or the team. I think it's safe to say that anytime you have hierarchies involved, then it's going to put the psychological safety at risk. We are fortunate in that we have, our areas of responsibility across the enterprise, and we have a common unified outcome we're looking for, which is enterprise agility. We all buy into that outcome, and I think we see the benefits, and we understand there's going to be challenges along the way. So having clarity on are we working to the same ends is really, really important. If we don't understand if leader A and leader B are working to the same end, we have competing goals, competing priorities, then psychological safety is at risk. Doesn't mean it's not there, but it's at risk because I don't know if you're going to support me in my goal if it might have a challenge with your goal. So I would say upfront, be very clear on, what is that connection? What is that common ground that we're going to come together on? Two, I think the smaller the group, the smaller the imposition of some of these conversations. So I've got an example that comes to mind. At the end of last week, there was a proposal for a new way of approaching something, and what was under the covers was we're not happy with how things are going today. And so got a small group together, and it was about tone, it was about volume, it was about pace, it was about space, just to give them enough time and ask the right questions around, what isn't working today, and how might who do you see that is contributing the most to that? And so I think it takes a very active investment. So to state it blankly, we do not have psychological safety everywhere. There's many layers in the organization. There's many different teams. There's a lot on our agenda. And so it takes a very conscious effort to ask them what their challenges are and then work to resolve those one by one.
Yeah, I love that notion of intentionality in how you interface with them as a leader.
Mhm.
By doing that, you're modeling what that could look like. Just
Yeah.
these questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Great advice.
And emerging from that conversation, the follow-up was two of the four of us who met needed to go and work on next steps. And so I took the extra step to work with that leader on my side to really appreciate what we heard. It was new information. I appreciate that we got the new information, not why is this the first time I'm hearing it. I appreciate that this took courage for you to share these challenges that you're experiencing because I want more of that. We're going to be better together when we work that way. So taking those opportunities to make sure that next steps and the leaders have what they need to continue that, in my mind, really helps that psychological safety.
Yeah, and I also love what you just pointed out, which is psychological safety is a practice. It's not an event.
Yes. Yeah.
Ongoing and had the follow up and so
Yep.
forth. Great. Okay, so two more questions. So one is about, I love this one from Elena, and then the other one about like taking time. It's about time to do practice. The other one is that I'll return to after this is perhaps more of a one that's focused in life outside of work.
Mhm.
Would you be willing to opine on that, which is, what kind of practices would you recommend when working with family members? But
Yes.
so let's first, though, Elena's question, which is this one in the Q&A. I particularly work as a team consultant, and the main challenge I find in managers is that they find it hard to make a stop in order to have these kinds of exercises or practices.
Yep.
Is there a way, in order to help them make that stop and do these kinds of exercises?
Yeah. We're all one person at home and at work. And we spend so much time at work. This is some of the justification I give for getting people comfortable with some of the practices that we're developing, because they may feel like, hey, I'm not comfortable. This feels more, non-corporate world. But the reality is, how we show up at work is really important. So the first thing I would encourage the management is, what practices are they, what are they practicing outside of work? How are they showing up each day? Are they making time for themselves? Quick asterisk side note, I learned self-care, and again, I try not to do cliches or anything like that, but self-care is not selfish. If you're a leader and you're in a role in a high stress environment, the pace of change is increasing, we know this. In my mind, we're giving of ourselves every day, all day. If you're in a meeting, you're thinking, you're evaluating not just your opinion, but you're assessing the room. That's the definition of emotional intelligence. How am I coming across? How's the team interacting? Who do I need to be in the moment? What outcome do we need to achieve? Those types of things take mental exertion. And depending on your personality type, how much that excites you or drains you is going to vary. So if we show up to work depleted, if we don't have some simple practice on walking into work or driving to work, we're going to be starting off at a deficit. Once we step into work, often people may feel like that's not even my time. I don't have control. I have an agenda. I have a schedule. I have to go and comply that. So be it. Search Inside Yourself would advocate micro practices, which is if you have the luxury of walking to your next meeting, can you take some deep, meaningful breaths? Can you stop? Can you observe nature? Can you pay attention to your breath? Can you actually feel and connect with your feet as they touch the ground as you walk forward? All these things to bring us back to reality and bring us back to who we are and where we are. It's a reset. And instead of a culmination of stress after stress after stress, it's a stress reset. It's a connect to purpose. It's a stress, it's a reset. It's a connect to outcome. And if you do that, it perforates the day. So I would challenge anyone that says they don't have time for the practice, because there are practices that can be very, very modest. And again, there are statements out there that says, everybody could benefit from 10 minutes a day of meditation. And if you don't have time for 10 minutes, you probably need 20 minutes. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, and I think you can weave them in through the day. Like you said, we will advocate for practices. So in, I think, response to Elena's question, I would also say can't means won't.
Right.
And so there is
That was
always
being polite. Yeah.
there's always space. They have space to drink water that day. Did they have space to eat breakfast? Those are practices too.
Yes. Yeah.
How you value them, how you see them. And I love how you prioritize them, David. Thanks. All right. So then a life outside of work. How do these practices apply to life outside of work, especially family, for example? I'll share them later, but
yeah. Okay. I'm going to share something that I love to read. I think we can gain so much by reading. And, as someone who interacts with others, I've found referring people to other experts, so it's not David's opinion, that's really beneficial. There's actually science, and I don't own the science, but here's a great avenue for you to explore this more. Terrence Real is a psychologist, and he focuses on relational psychology. And he wrote a book, Us, and he's written, I don't want to talk about it, he's written a couple of books, and he's absolutely fantastic. And he came up with this oh so simple approach that if you have a conflict between a loved one, here's what you can do, and here's a way to navigate that. And I will never forget it. The premise being, I challenge anybody to find a way that you could debate somebody that how they feel is how they feel. It's an inherent truth that if somebody shares how they feel, you probably shouldn't argue with them, because they know how they feel. They're connecting to that. If you make a challenge on why they're doing the thing they're doing, now you're in trouble again. So this premise is, let's say that I have a conflict with my loved one. I'm going to start by saying, hey, I'd love to be able to have a little bit of time where we can talk through something that didn't go so well for me. Okay, yeah, what's going on? This is what I observed. I observed you came home late, and this is how it made me feel. I felt like you didn't care, like you didn't call, you didn't let me know that you were coming home. And here's what I made up about it. I made up that all these things, that you don't value me, that our time's not precious, all those different things. So here's what I observed, here's what I felt, here's what I made up about it, and here's what you can do to help me in the future. And so those 4 steps, you can't be argued out of those steps, because you're taking ownership of it. Here's what I made up about it. In that, that shares openly with your loved one or with your family member what's going on for you. And oh my gosh, that wasn't my intention. It's a busy day. And so it opens up the door to a conversation through questions that really help people with compassion, with empathy. Because what it's not doing, it's not labeling somebody. It's not putting an identification on someone. You always do this, you never do this. Those are traps. And so what drives me is that mutual respect for one another. We're going to have change, we're going to have conflict, we're going to have disagreements, but why waste the energy in escalating? Because often it's not the issue that created the conflict that lasts with people. It's the things you said that you regret saying. And that's the emotional response in our interaction. That's the ego. We haven't talked about ego very much, but we have an ego problem. And our brains and our personalities have been designed to create this personality to engage with the outside world. And we're so involved in, what that means for my identity that we have to put that down. We have to put that on the couch and we have to engage in a soft manner.
Yeah, I love that. And it almost loops also back, not almost, it does loop back to work. This notion of like, never just feelings, there's stuff underneath them. But if you meet them with other feelings, particularly negative ones, feelings, and that can, become a reactive situation. So I love how you sort of slow it down and sort of say, well, this is what happened. Let's talk about the different steps and then think of solutions. And I think that loops it's certainly applicable at home and at work. I was going to share that I do this with my teenage son. My version of it is like respond versus react.
Yes.
Respond versus react. Like if he's feeling this way, if he's acting this way, I'll just sort of respond and say, can you tell me like what happened here? Let's talk about this, because it seems like this was a difficult situation. I know it made certainly myself, others, feel this way. So let's figure it out. And so we actually teach that skill set called response flexibility. From another psychologist, Linda Graham, who writes a lot about resistance. She talks about response flexibility, also borrowing from Viktor Frankl's work, that sort of pause between stimulus and response.
Yes.
Inhabiting that pause. I think Viktor Frankl was quoted as saying, that's sort of inhabiting that pause is where your freedom lies. You have a degree of freedom between something that's been stated or happens or expressed and your way to respond to it. And importantly, respond versus react, right?
Yes.
And us reacting, our own feelings can get us reacting when we're only moving from that place. So it is, again, it's a practice, actually. Practice of response flexibility, the practice of mindful listening, empathy, all those things.
So if I could, we have touched a lot on practices and skills. And so those are like real hard aspects of this. One thing that I've learned is the power of habit. There's lots of good books, I've got Charles Duhigg and a bunch of others. The main takeaway there is if you want to establish practice, you are establishing a habit. So remove all the barriers, remove as much inertia, make it as simple as possible. And that means be consistent. It means give yourself a couple of opportunities throughout the day so that if you miss one, it's not completely out the window. Like I want to do X for 2 minutes in the beginning of the day, but if I don't, I'm going to hit it at lunch. And if I don't do that, I'm going to hit it at the end of the day. Like, don't give yourself the excuse to miss it. Set the journal right next to your bed. And that's the time you do it, is every night before you get into bed. So habits, and you can nest habits. Hey, I take vitamins every morning. So I'm going to have a mindful moment when I do that. There's so many things you can do, but if you establish the habits consciously, you're so much better off.
You got to hear a funny hack I'll share. It's a very personal one. My hack around instantiating habit. I like to try to meditate a little bit every day in the morning before I start my day. I will admit, right? So I'll share that. And so what I do, though, is because I'm aware of the gravitational pull of the devices and the connected world. As soon as I open my eyes, right? I open my eyes and go, oh, I'm so peaceful this morning. I hear the birds chirping, but sometimes I wake up going, oh God, did I send that email or that? Right? Well, there's the device. So here's my hack. A while ago, I realized that if I have meditation cushions I sit on when I practice mindfulness and meditation, and they're usually more or less at the foot of my bed. Okay. And for a while, I was like, should I put those in the closet after I use them? And I decided I'm just going to keep them there
Yeah, right.
so that when I get up out of bed, that's the first thing I see.
Mhm.
Further was it's near a wall socket where I charge my phone.
Yeah,
So I I plug in my phone and I put it on the meditation cushion in the
yes,
morning so that
right.
I remove the phone to sit on the cushion. And it's a reminder of like, you'll get to this, move this aside, sit down
Yep.
for, and that's how I like reconcile like the pull of the
Yeah.
digital world with my mindfulness practice. It's almost silly, but it
Well,
actually instantiates
it's
sitting down
it's
with my device.
it's scientifically proven because I mean we're pattern machines. We're designed to be on autopilot. We can live our lives on autopilot, and so let's use that to our advantage, and let's
Absolutely.
autopilot ourselves into a little bit of consciousness.
I think that's the quote we should end on. Let's autopilot ourselves into a little bit of consciousness. That is great. David, thank you so much.
You're
As
welcome.
like you get it, and I hope for our world that more leaders practice the way you practice, and not only practice, by the way, because there's one thing to build awareness, but then there's another thing to integrate awareness into the rhythms and routines of your life and your work. Build awareness and then integrate awareness into the rhythms and routines of your life and work. And, in meeting you, I know you're a person who's done that. I've seen it firsthand. I hope it was instructive for others to get a sense of that and that other leaders adopt the same practices. So I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights, your wisdom, your experience with folks here and taking the time, making the
Yeah.
time.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us. Really, very much appreciated.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your time.